Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Virtual CISO podcast. I'm your host, John Verry, and with me, as always, the giggling beast to my beauty, Jeremy Sport. Hey, Jeremy.
Oh, bonjour, John.
All right, I'm not going to even go there. What'd you think of my conversation with Kevin? Kind of a little unusual for us, having an internal guest on the podcast.
Yeah, and because of that, I really would like to start off with a disclaimer. This conversation is all about a piece of technology we developed internally. It's a pivot point security expert system, and we are not presenting this as a sales pitch. The goal of the conversation is really to educate and really educate everyone on how vendor due diligence and really third-party risk management as a whole has just missed the mark for a while. Companies are extremely reliant on vendors, and vendors are a massive security risk. Yet efforts to manage that risk are incredibly time-consuming and expensive. And this dilemma is something that people and organizations have been facing for a long time. And that's why we're sharing, our answer to this challenge. And who better to talk about it than Kevin Hermosura, who uses this tool in our own third-party risk management practice.
Well said. I think from my perspective, the concept of embedding 20 plus years of our security expertise, our third-party risk management expertise, into a tool offers some significant advantages that we're really excited to have developed and look forward to continuing to advance with some due diligence automation ideas that we have as well. So fun stuff, interesting stuff.
Absolutely. I won't sugarcoat this. If you are looking for a paradigm shift in the way you manage third-party risk and assess your vendors, this conversation is for you. In almost every case in the world, if you want something faster, cheaper, and better, they say you can only have two. But with our accelerated risk management tool, you can have all three.
Yeah, definitely a paradigm shift. With no further delay, let's get to the show. Kevin, how are you today?
Good. How about yourself?
Good to catch up. Thanks for joining me. And usually like to start super simple. So I'm going to make it about as simple as you can. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what is it you do.
All right. So I'm the practice lead for third-party risk management here at Pivot Point Security. We help organizations in a variety of different ways. We help organizations build their vendor risk management program from the ground up. Improve their existing programs, perform some vendor reviews. Whether that's remote or some sort of on-site validation, using popular tools, popular mechanisms like shared assessments, SIG, or the SCA, or popular software tools like tools from OneTrust or Prevalent.
Gotcha. And that's why we have you here today, right? We want to talk about third-party risk and some cool stuff we're doing there. Yep. And you're joining us from the sunny climes of, and I hear warm climes of LA today, right?
Yeah. It's we're in the middle of a heat wave, so it's a great place to be, I guess.
Yeah, I was just to say, if we're going to be in lockdown, a heat wave in LA doesn't sound too bad a place to be being forced to be locked in. So before we get down to business, we have a tradition. We like to ask, personalize you a little bit. What's your drink of choice?
My drink of choice is I keep it simple. Jameson Irish whiskey.
That's pretty good. Neat, rocks.
Many different ways. And when I'm not drinking Jameson, it's a nice glass of red wine.
Gotcha. So on the Jameson, have you had the Caskmates?
No, actually, no.
So you got to have Jameson Caskmates. They did a version called Caskmate where it's Jameson aged in I think it's a bourbon barrel. It might have been a sherry. But anyway, really, because Jameson's is an excellent little whiskey. It adds a little bit more interest to it.
Oh yeah.
And on the red wine side, do you go? You're a blend guy, a cab guy, a Pinot Noir guy?
Mostly blends. It really just depends on the time of day and the in the mood that you're in. One of my favorites.
Time of day, you're not talking about morning, are we?
Well, that depends, I guess. But no, one of the things I can remember, there's a winery called Robert Mondavi up in Napa, and they make a bourbon barrel aged Cabernet. It's actually really, really cheap, and you can get it almost anywhere.
Yeah, it's
But
ridiculous. For about $13, $14 here, you can get it, and it's an excellent. I've had it.
Yeah.
I actually just bought a bottle of is it Behringer? A Zin that was bourbon barrel aged, because I hadn't seen that. Usually you see the cab. So, but that's enough. That's enough liquor talk for now. We're starting to worry the people. So let's get to really why we invited you to be on the show. And we don't often have internal people on the show, but really the idea here is that me personally and us as a team have been working on something we call accelerated risk management, which is a mechanism which provides, it's an expert system, if you will, for generating risk assessment. And you and I, were chatting about that, and you were using it when you were pitching in and helping out on some ISO internal audits and things of that nature. And we had this idea of, this might be kind of cool to look at from a third-party risk management perspective. Really, is there much of a difference? I mean, risk is risk. Risk is risk, whether or not we're looking at it from the scope is purely internal, or the scope is working with a third party, correct?
Yeah. I think, like you said, risk is risk, and whether you're assessing privacy risks or security risks or vendor risks, financial risks, and so on and so forth. Risk is risk these days, right?
Yeah. So like from why is this so important? Like, right, this idea of what we're trying to accomplish, right? Making risk vendor risk management, faster, cheaper, better. Why is that so important at this particular point in time?
So at this point in time, I think a lot of organizations are, increasing their reliance on third parties.
Mm-hmm.
Folks are no longer, hiring a bunch of developers to, let's say, build an in-house HRIS. They're just going to go out and buy one.
Why, is this so important at this particular point in time?
Yeah, this is quite important because, organizations are increasingly placing their reliance on third parties to run their organizations. Folks aren't really hiring a bunch of developers nowadays to develop any sort of internal, systems. They're just going to go buy something off the shelf. Mm-hmm. These days, I think the statistics say that over 60% of the breaches can be, directly or indirectly related to a third party. Examples of that I can think of off the top of my head. Quest Diagnostics had a breach last year. I believe it was sometime over summer. They had a good number of patients, and that was due to, I believe, a billing collections vendor. Mm-hmm. And then, the one that I like to talk about from a long time ago is Target, because that one was through an HVAC vendor, which sounds very, very surprising.
Yeah, I'm sure no one thought that, right? And then, I think the other thing too to point out is that as we deal with COVID, and I think when we think about the post-COVID world, I don't think the genie's going back into the bottle. I think this work from home and more diverse workforce and increased use of cloud to provide resilience and business continuity. So I think this is just going to get worse, right? And if we don't have a fast, effective, repeatable, reliable, cost-effective way to manage vendor risk, I think we're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, and we don't want to be in trouble. At the end of the day, we need to have vendors, and we need to have be confident that these vendors can securely transmit, store our data quickly and reliably, of course.
Yep. So what are some of the biggest challenges that as we started out down this path, right, with trying to use the accelerated risk management expert system? What were some of the challenges we were trying to solve?
Yeah, so one of the challenges is that vendor risk management is, it's hard to scale. It's very time consuming. It can take 10 plus hours. Can be quite expensive. You may need to hire staff. You may need to outsource. You may need to manage the folks you outsource to. Things of that nature. And then a couple of the other things. Existing programs these days, existing mechanisms. Sometimes the results are quite marginal. You've mm-hmm. got these, most often than not, these one-size questionnaires sort of yield an incomplete view of your your total risk, as it relates to vendors. It kind of ignores that the shared responsibility model.
Mm-hmm.
These standardized TPRM practices always point the finger at the vendor, or they point it at the cloud provider. They rarely kind of ever point the finger back at ourselves and our responsibilities as it relates to these vendors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah. And if you think about it, when you get to even a small to moderate sized organization, it's not unusual for them to have, 50 or 100 or, 200 vendors, correct?
Yeah. And when you start looking at those sort of volumes, it's quite overwhelming for a lot of these organizations. And obviously there's a time and a cost associated with having to review that landscape there.
Right. And, and I like what you said about shared responsibility. One of the things, and that goes back to the Microsoft, I believe it was, did a great job, and we'll ask them to put up this graphic, during the podcast, is, Microsoft had that shared responsibility grid that they did, which I think is fantastic, where, it speaks to, the difference between a SaaS, where in a SaaS, you largely still always retain the responsibility for the information, the devices, and the accounts and identities. And most of the technology stack below that is the responsibility of the vendor, where on the if you go to an infrastructure as a service, right, you're still going to own, let's say, the application, the network controls, and the operating system. So that's what you mean by this idea of this shared responsibility, correct?
Yeah. So I think, like you said, it depends on the model of the the engagement of the service that's being provided. That kind of dictates who's responsible for what in this case.
Right.
A simple sort of analogy I like to think of it as is I could go out there, I could buy the best front door lock in the world for my house, from the top vendor in the world. Let's say I do that, but if I fail to lock it, that's my responsibility. The entire solution falls apart.
Right. And it's interesting. So and the other thing I like you pointed out was the sort of the one size or two size fits all questionnaires. And logically, you have to do it that way because it's very difficult to have dozens of different questionnaires that fit dozens of different use cases. But that being said, the questionnaire that you would send to somebody who's coming in doing, plant maintenance, or like we've got one law firm where they've got a guy who comes around and shines shoes. Right. The vendor questionnaire you would issue him is going to be a little bit different than the guy that's your IT service provider that's coming in to do, let's say, break fix on machines, which is going to be a little bit different than Salesforce or their, NetDocs for a document management system.
Yeah. You're not going to be, you're not going to be asking, that shoe shiner vendor about their, let's say, like technical information security controls, because that's not necessarily relevant in this case.
Right. Same thing with like, if you've got someone coming on site to do plumbing, right? What do we really, so as an example, right? What would be the only questions that would matter for someone being on site doing physical work of that nature?
Yeah, they'd be, probably focused on those HR controls, the background checks and things of that nature to make sure those folks are the, the appropriate folks to perform that kind of work.
Exactly. All right. So let's talk a little bit about ARM. Right. And then we can kind of walk through how you're using ARM to improve vendor risk management. Right. So from my perspective, right, ARM is an expert system that we've created. And what we've done is it has a predefined library of vulnerabilities and threats. And ARM is able to accurately quantify, the likelihood and impact of every one of those threats in the threat library, acting on every vulnerability in the vulnerability library for every data type that you process. So it literally calculates every potential risk in your universe. So what you'll do is you'll explain what information, so for the ARM portion, you explain what types of information you have, what the impact would be, in a numeric way of, or low, medium, high way to your organization if that data was compromised, and what it will do is calculate the inherent risk for each of those scenarios. So you looked at this and said, well, this is great. How do I properly contextualize that? And so the first thing that you did was you started thinking about how different vendor types vary that risk, correct? So
Yeah.
talk about how that worked out, what types of vendors you were looking at, and some examples of how the risk differs between different types of vendors with different levels of access to different levels of data, different types of data.
Yeah. So each vendor obviously poses a different level of risk to the organization. We take a look at a SaaS vendor that has a persistent connection to to our environment. Obviously they're going to pose a certain level of risk, which may be quite high in that case, versus the shoe shiner or the let's say janitor or something like that, who is just coming in to kind of vacuum the building or mop the floors and things like that. They don't have network connection or anything like that. You take a look at those different types. You also take a look at the obviously the data elements that are involved. That janitor likely won't have any access to any sort of confidential information as long as the the organization has a clean desk policy in place, obviously.
Or good physical security controls where the person's being escorted or physically restricted through access cards or something of that nature, right?
Yep. And so I think what we've done, as it relates to third-party risk management, with this ARM solution is, we've been able to sort of right size the questionnaires. Obviously, these sort of janitorial or vendors with physical but don't have any sort of access to data, you need a certain type of questionnaire, and then these SaaS or infrastructure as a service providers, they're going to need a different type of questionnaire, obviously, that focuses on a different set of controls.
Right. So in short, what you're saying is that you've developed, call them profiles, if you will, for different types of vendors, and then determined what type of risk each of those pose based on their method of access, the type of data they have access to, the model by which they engage with you. Is that kind of what you did?
Yeah. So there's a couple of different profiles which we've added there. Depending upon the type of vendor, you've got kind of your SaaS vendors, your PaaS, your infrastructure as a service. You've got your let's say you've got like a managed service providers, consultants, so on and so forth. And obviously depending upon the nature of the engagement, the nature of the data elements they have access to, what they're handling, that poses a different level of risk. And based on all of these elements, the ARM solution is designed to create a questionnaire that is just the right size.
All right. So I think you've got a 4-step process that you follow. Why don't we walk through that 4-step process, at a high level? Like so I sit down, I'm about to do a vendor risk assessments for a particular vendor. What does that look like? What do I actually do?
Yeah, so I think it starts with step one, which is generating an inherent risk score for the vendor based on the context of the engagement there.
Right, and to do that, what type of data are you providing?
Yes, so a couple of different things. You need to understand the different data elements. You need to understand, let's say it's personal health information, payment card data, things of that nature. And you'll need to, understand the obviously the data volumes that you send off. Obviously, a vendor that you only share 5 records with is going to pose less of a risk than a vendor you send millions of records to every single month.
Right, and that's because of the cost of breach notification, as an example.
Yep. Cool. And then the next step here, we take a look at dynamically generating that questionnaire. Like I spoke about earlier. We obviously we create a sort of right size questionnaire for that specific vendor. That kind of caters to the specific risks that that vendor poses to the organization.
So a vendor that would never be on site would have a different questionnaire than a vendor that would be hosting a cloud service, something like that?
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Precisely.
Gotcha.
And then you would take that questionnaire, which is exported in Excel format these days, and that's sort of a universally accepted format these days. And you'd send that off to the vendor. That you would get, which is your typical process. They answer the questionnaire, and you get it back. And what you'd be able to do is import that questionnaire, and sort of have the tool calculate the risks for you.
Gotcha. So we start with inherent risk. We send a questionnaire which is specific to their risk, that vendor's specific risks based on the type of vendor they are and the type of data they have access to and the quantity of data they have access to. They're entering into that, the maturity of the controls?
Yeah. So the questionnaire is, it's aligned to the SCF, which is the Secure Controls Framework. And within that questionnaire, the vendor has the choice to answer all of the the questions that we've chosen for them, or I guess the tool has chosen for them. They have the ability to input their level of maturity for each of those questions. And
Gotcha.
And then we take those, obviously we take that maturity and suck it back into the system, and the system does its work here.
Gotcha. So as an example, if one of the risks was that a non-knowledgeable employee would be socially engineered, which would result in the disclosure of our data, we would have a control around, let's say, security awareness education. And if the maturity of that control in their environment was very high, that would reduce that risk more than if the maturity of that control was moderate or low, correct?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. That's
Gotcha.
Precisely what it would do. Yep.
All right. And what happens if the risk, the residual risk, is not where it needs to be?
Yeah. So if the residual risk is too high, the ARM tool will automatically flag those and make those aware to you.
Gotcha. And the other thing which I think is really cool is that it'll actually even give you some automated recommendations, based on that. So as an example, it'll know, in that particular example I gave, it'll know that, really, in order for you as our vendor to meet our risk tolerance levels, you would need to improve that security awareness education program from its current maturity of 1 to a maturity of 2.5 or 3 in order to reach our risk, our acceptance risk criteria. Correct?
Yep. Yeah. It would make those those specific recommendations, like you said.
So let's talk about the one thing which I'm also excited about with what we're doing together is this concept of shared responsibility. So you just kind of walk through, and we ended up with this questionnaire for our vendor. But we also end up with another questionnaire. Who's that for?
Yeah. So in the tool we can generate a questionnaire that we can issue internally, and the goal of that questionnaire is to understand our sort of internal control environment. And the reason we do that is, because of that shared responsibility model, we need to take a look at, our internal controls as well as the vendor's controls, and kind of combine those two controls into, what I like to call total solution risk.
Gotcha. So give me an example, right? So as an example, let's talk about go back to the custodian. So what would we probably ask about if they've got a custodian? We want to make sure that the internal controls are sufficient for secure custodial access.
Yes. So internal controls for internal controls that we would be concerned with at our organization, in that case would probably be let's say sort of our physical and environmental controls that we have in place. Closed circuit television, electronic badging. Things of that nature. Those are
logs, right? Things like that.
Yep. Yeah, those are the things that we would be responsible for. Obviously, the vendor is responsible for background checks, like we talked about earlier. And that's sort of that's a great example of the controls that they have and the controls that we have, and bucketing those together and taking a look at the the total risk there.
Right. Exactly. So and if we looked at like a SaaS as an example, if we put our data all on Salesforce, and that's great, right? Because we get a SOC 2, we get an ISO 27001 certificate from Salesforce, but does that mean we're secure?
No, not at all. I could go by Salesforce, and Salesforce is a very popular, very secure solution. But let's say I don't have multi-factor authentication, and I set my password to password. That's we take a look at the control, the lack of controls that I put in place combined with Salesforce's controls, and no matter what Salesforce does, it's kind of my fault here in setting my password to password.
Right, exactly, because we, despite the fact we're using Salesforce, are responsible for user management. So I was a subject matter expert in a lawsuit, and it ended up that they had implemented Salesforce and they made 45 people global admins. So when the guy from the East Coast stole the sales and marketing list for the worldwide organization, you weren't surprised, right? Or if you don't have, so can Salesforce protect you against bad vulnerability and configuration management, or a user being phished? No, right?
No, not at all. It's that's why we've got to take a look at sort of that total risk profile there. We can't just rely on these cloud providers, these SaaS providers, or any vendor for that matter. We've got to take a look at what they've got, as well as what we've got in place, and combine those two and have a better understanding of the entire risk landscape.
Sure. So I think the last week we were chatting about this, and I think you used the term faster, better, cheaper, which that breaks the old law constraints. Tell me about that. So from your perspective, why do you think that this is such a significant breakthrough?
Yeah. So the law of constraints kind of says that you can only pick two out of the three there. You can't have your cake and eat it too, right?
Mm-hmm. And we're saying you can. So
yeah. So we're saying you can with this solution, and so we think this is faster. Automated due diligence reviews. We feel that a lot of these can be completed in 15 minutes or less.
Wow.
Obviously, if you add some sort of human validation or QA component of that, it's going to add some hours. We think that this is definitely a better solution. Properly contextualizing that risk. Looking at the vendor risk as well as looking at the risks that we have, the controls or lack thereof. Is a better way to look at vendor risk management. Mm-hmm. And then also, we try not to use this word, right? This is obviously leveraging automation is going to make things a lot cheaper. Mm-hmm. Leveraging this automation to sort of right size these due diligence questionnaires, allows them to get done in a shorter time frame, and the shorter your questionnaire, the more accurate the answers are likely to be.
Well, not only are they more accurate, but you're going to get them faster. Who hasn't had the experience? You've been in third-party risk management forever, and I deal with it a lot. Acting as CISO and virtual CISO places, is that it's not unusual that it takes a month or 6 weeks to get an answer from people, and it makes sense. I'm your janitor, and I just got a 140 question security questionnaire that asked me about my business continuity plans and my incident response plan. What? Yeah. How am I going to respond to that? So I do like the idea that by right sizing the questionnaire, you end up with multiple benefits, right? One is it allows them to answer those questions because there's less of them better, right? So we get a better result. It allows them to then more quickly respond to it. So it improves our time, right? And our time to market with new solutions. And then the third thing is that because the fact that we've limited those questions, that improves our own efficiencies on the backside as well, right? If you have to grind through 300 questions on a due diligence review, look at all their answers, look at the artifacts they provided, that's going to take a hell of a lot longer than if you've got to look at 50 or 60.
Yeah. We don't want I think the problem these days with some of these standardized questionnaires I'm not going to name any names, but some of these lengthier questionnaires out there is that it kind of holds up the procurement process, and that's not the intention here. We want to foster sort of positive business relationships, while maintaining obviously a certain level of risk management and due diligence.
Right.
And having questionnaires that like you said are the janitor taking a look at having to answer about business continuity. That's not the right context. That's that's sort of the wrong questionnaire. And if we can address that, I think we put ourselves in a better place to do these faster, better, and cheaper.
Right. And I think part of the other better is that shared responsibility. I find it remarkable when we consider outsourcing a solution that we don't consider our contribution to the security of that solution. And I think this forces that concept, right? Forces that consideration.
Yeah. I think this is something that a lot of people overlook. We comes up in conversations every now and then, but when folks think about vendor risk management, they only think about the vendor risks, the controls or lack of controls at that vendor. They never really take time to self-reflect and look at what they've got in place and what their people have in place.
Right. And probably in the majority of the times that you're outsourcing a service to somebody, probably the bulk of the risk is on your side, especially if you're using the big guys. I mean, if you're outsourcing something to AWS or Microsoft or Salesforce or Google, right? Those are giant companies with pretty significant track records on security. What's the likelihood that they're going to be the bigger risk than you in that relationship?
Yeah, I think you're always going to be, you're always going to be the sort of the weakest link, right? I can't count how many times I've seen, some sort of system misconfiguration, SSH open to the world kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. If there's an S3 bucket that's exposed, that's on you, not on Amazon, right?
Yeah.
You didn't do your due diligence. You didn't understand your responsibility, right?
Exactly.
Cool. I think one other thing which is interesting to note, just because if anyone's curious, there's always a concern about putting, a lot of risk information up in the cloud. One of the things that we've done to this point is we actually chose to not keep any data in the cloud, huh?
Yeah. It's a good thing, to you're talking about the ARM solution, right? So with ARM, we're not storing any of the information that gets inputted into the platform there. We're using sort of the industry standard, which is Excel spreadsheets. A lot of folks love either love them or hate them, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, or an API. If somebody's got an internal GRC or tool or something of that nature, and they want to talk to it via an API, we'll do that. But still, the idea is that we're not maintaining any of this information, which I think is pretty cool as well.
Yep.
Cool. I think we beat it up pretty good.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts?
I think that pretty much covers it.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking the same thing. We always like to have a little fun and get different people's perspectives. So I'll ask you the standard question we ask. If I was going to ask you for a fictional character or even a real person that you think would make an either amazing or a horrible CISO, who would it be and why?
All right, this this might surprise you. But I'm going to go with an amazing CISO. The person that would make an amazing CISO would be Michael Scott from The Office. And hear me out here. Hear me out.
Wait. Would he have a plaque that said "World's Best CISO"? I just got to know.
Probably, actually. And his business cards would probably say the same thing. But as ridiculous as that sounds, I think he makes the workplace an enjoyable place to be. With all his antics, he's got a sort of a very strong, work hard, emphasis on the play hard mentality. But I think he does a great job of distracting his employees from a very mundane task. They sell paper, which isn't the most exciting job in the world. It keeps them sort of feeling appreciated, motivated. If you're a fan of the show, you'll notice that he kind of considers everyone a friend and family. So I think at the end of the day, as a CISO, you can kind of you can choose to run your team kind of like a boring summer camp, or you can accomplish all of the same things with a smile on your face and everyone else's face. So I think he's a great candidate for one.
That is definitely on the unique side of the equation. I mean, does that make Dwight a horrible CISO? I mean, he does know like martial arts and things of that nature, right? He was provisional police officer for a while, right?
Yeah. I think you just need a good balance. I think you need a very dynamic team.
That's an interesting thought process. Like, if I had asked the question is who would make a good security team, then it gets a little bit interesting. Like when you start to think about like the doubters like Stanley and the dreamers like Jenna, and Jim. It does they would make a good like virtual security team, I suppose, huh?
Oh yeah. I think they've got a healthy balance over there.
Yeah, there you go. I love that show. So in fact, I was so disappointed at home. I downloaded an Office. It's the scene from Michael's Office as my backdrop. So I'm sitting here like this, and you got Stanley. You can see Stanley out through the glass door, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna pop it up now. It'll look funny, but I realized it's only you keep them on your local machine. It's not stored on the cloud. All right. So one last question. So I know every single day you're chatting with people about information security and very often third-party risk management. And this podcast is listened to by information security business leaders, people of that nature. Any interesting topics you'd suggest for another episode?
Yeah, I think an interesting topic would be the sort of the art of reverse engineering recent data breaches. Talking about how we can protect ourselves, from a similar situation, prevent it from happening to you. I think everyone's going to make mistakes, and I think. I'm a firm believer that life is kind of too short to make all of the mistakes that you could possibly make. So, learning from other people's mistakes is a great way to go about it.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, it was so funny because I was just listening to a YouTube video. Jim Manico, who's an OWASP guy, is going to be on the show, and I was listening to something that he did, and he had a clever idea for exactly that kind of an idea. And the idea is that if you're running a SaaS, you should be looking at, Pastebin and have I been pawned and sites of that nature, and you should be dynamically blocking compromised username password combinations to prevent credential stealing attacks.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic. I'll have to take a look at that.
Yeah, and I thought right away, I'm like, well, that's pretty clever. I mean, he's a really smart guy. But then you literally right after that came up and almost said the exact same thing, right, in a more generic way. So yeah, that actually is a pretty cool idea. Anything else?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Cool. Well, thank you. I appreciate you coming on. Before I say my final farewell, how can folks get in contact with you if they had a question or want to chat?
Yeah. Folks can email me at kevin.hermosura@pivotpointsecurity.com. I know that's a mouthful, or feel free to reach out to anyone here at Pivot Point Security, and I'm sure they'll forward you off to me, or anyone can reach out obviously on LinkedIn as well.
Cool, Kevin. Thanks, man. Good to catch up.
Yep. Thanks, John.